How many times have you tried to get someone else to change? You've explained to them all of the reasons. You've maybe got really angry or very emotional and tried to push them that way. Or you've begged and pleaded them just to change. You've shown them everything. But no matter what you've done, they have not changed. And you just think, oh my God, why can't they understand? If only they saw exactly what I could see, then they would change. Why haven't they? And that can be really frustrating when it's so obvious to you, and yet the other person refuses, sometimes it seems, to actually just make this change that's often going to be good for them. Wanting other people to change is very normal. Often we can see what other people have as blind spots, and we can much more easily notice that than perhaps they can. But when we try to force another person to change, we come up against a fundamental obstacle. Other people's thoughts, feelings, and actions are their property. No matter how much we want, we cannot get somebody else to change unless they want to. But that doesn't mean that we're entirely helpless. There is a lot that we can do within our property, our thoughts, feelings, and actions that can help foster change in someone else, create the space for them to change, and also to protect ourselves whilst they are potentially acting or being in a way that we might find difficult at times. In this video, I'll explain why we feel so strongly about trying to get other people to change, why they often don't, especially when they can even see the logical reasons, and what you can do to effectively foster change in another person without overstepping your responsibilities or failing to uphold your own boundaries. One of the most frustrating feelings is knowing that someone could change something and pointing out to them and then they won't do it. It just feels offensive. And this is especially painful when their behavior doesn't just impact them, but it also has an effect on you and the people you care about. When clear and logical arguments fail to make any impact, most of us resort to other tactics: arguing, begging, pleading, potentially even trying to control or manipulate the other person, or blackmailing or forcing them just to change their behavior or their mind. And at the core of all of these strategies is this hope that if only they understood, then they would change. But you know that probably isn't true, because on some level they do understand, and yet they still won't change. So why do they do this? The answer is that people only change when they want to. And knowing or understanding is not enough. You have to feel the motivation to change in order to actually make that happen. And when we pressure people through arguing, begging, pleading, we're forcing them to do something. And when you force someone to do something, they often entrench themselves further in the position they're already in because they feel attacked and so they become defensive. This is because when we act in these ways, we come up against feelings that are not conducive to change. We come up against feelings that cause resistance and stuckness. These are feelings like anger, guilt, and resentment. It's a bit like flailing in quicksand. The more that you push and struggle, the quicker you're going to get stuck in and just wrapped up. Change simply cannot happen in a nervous system that feels forced to do so, in a nervous system that's under a lot of pressure and is experiencing a lot of unregulated guilt and shame. So this is why pressure doesn't lead to reflection, because when you pressure someone, they become sort of fight or flighty rather than, reflective and changey. And the more you push, the more they defend who they are and where they are. And you might, with enough pressure, be able to get them to act in a way that you want. But unless it truly comes from within them, then that action is not going to be based in their actual own motivation, and they will feel resentment and they will undercut you at any point they can because they're going to be feeling all these feelings of resentment and rebellion, and that needs an outlet. Real change only happens when someone feels two things at the same time: accepted and responsible. People change when they feel safe, when they feel okay as they are, and that change is something that they decide because they want to, not because someone's forcing it upon them. And they change because in this feeling of safety, they're able to recognize the cost of staying the same. And because they feel safe, it's less of a risk to change. Because change is quite scary. Change revolves, altering how we think and how we might do things in the world. And people hate change. And so it's about creating that feeling of safety in order for someone to relax enough and feel okay enough and not pressured, which might foster within them the desire to change innately. And if you want to do this, then what you have to do is love them and accept them exactly as they are. And you have to make sure that you're not shielding them from the consequences of their thoughts, feelings, and actions. And at the same time, within yourself, you need to hold good boundaries and hold the space for what it means for this person to change so that they have the opportunity and you're not stuck needing them to change. You have the actions that you need to look after yourself until that change has potentially happened. The best example of this is what happens in therapy. I've been in therapy for over 2.5 years, and if I look back at who I was and who I am now, the number one thing that has helped me has been my therapist just accepting me as I am. She just accepted me as I am, and I can only really see that now in hindsight. It's so difficult to see when you're stuck in it, but I could just be how I was, and then she would be how she was. And sometimes that meant she was angry at me or I was angry at her. And she had brilliant boundaries. You can't fuck with a good therapist. And in that safety of you will not change based on how I need you to be because you're too busy being you. And I therefore can be however I am because you don't need me to change either. In that safety feeling, change can happen. And also, I was never protected or shielded from the consequences of my actions. If I show up late to therapy, I lose the time. If I try and extend therapy beyond the time, I am gently kicked out. If I overstep any sort of boundaries, like if I don't pay, then there are consequences. And it's only in showing people that there are consequences and sticking with them that they can feel safe because they know where things stand. And I want to be clear that this is not control. There is an enormous difference between loving what is and having firm boundaries around what you will and won't have and being clear on who you are, and trying to control another person and wanting them to be another way and act in this way and look in this way and think in this way. Love is saying, I accept you as you are. Control is saying, I need you to be a certain way for me. Boundaries here are, I need to be a certain way to feel okay in this relationship. And consequences are, if you do X, then Y might happen. And I will not shield you from that because your actions and their consequences are your property. When someone is in such a relationship and feels safe and experiences the true consequences of how they're thinking and acting, that is the only circumstances in which someone can truly change and change will emerge within them. And to summarize that in some clear and concise actions, you yourself must have strong boundaries around what you will and won't accept. You yourself need to be clear with the other person about what you want from them, but you also simultaneously need to love and accept them exactly as they are and if they never changed at all. You need to be consistent in how you interact with them and ensuring that you don't protect them from the consequences of how they think and feel and act. You need to be non reactive because their feelings don't cause you to do anything. You are ultimately in charge of your thoughts, feelings, and actions. And finally, you need to surrender however they are. Surrender how they are How they are is not your property, them changing is not your property. But if you do follow the principles I just outlined, then that creates the best chance possibly for them to change. And I'll end with a quick reminder on that. People are going to be who they are. Reality is going to be as it is. And people do not change because they are forced to. They change because they want to. And your role, if someone you care about is acting in a way that you would prefer them to change, is to hold that potential for them, see them as they are, accept them as they are, have clear boundaries needed to protect yourself as they are, but hold that space that they might one day be able to transform into. And have a little faith that possibly they could change when they are ready. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit like and subscribe to see more content like this. Take care, and I will see you again soon.